Have you ever felt a subtle tightening in your chest, a fleeting shadow across your joy upon hearing of another's success? Perhaps a friend's career triumph, a colleague's lavish vacation, or a stranger's seemingly perfect life glimpsed through a screen. It's not malice, not anger, but a peculiar, quiet ache. This sensation often manifests as a slight clenching in the stomach, a momentary catch in your breath, or a sudden dulling of your own accomplishments. It's a sense that somehow their gain diminishes your own, as if the universe's bounty were a zero-sum game. This isn't jealousy, which often involves the fear of losing something you possess, like a partner or a position, to a rival. Instead, it's something more insidious, more self-devouring. Envy. It is the secret sickness of the soul, as ancient wisdom traditions describe it, a silent affliction that erodes inner peace and distorts our perception of reality, leaving us restless and perpetually dissatisfied. Consider the experience of Alex, a composite of many, a diligent professional who, despite a stable career and loving family, found himself increasingly agitated. One Tuesday evening, after a particularly challenging day at work, Alex was unwinding on his sofa, scrolling through his social media feed. He had just shared a pleasant dinner with his wife and kids, feeling a sense of quiet contentment when a notification popped up. It was Mark, his former college roommate, posting a picture of himself beaming, holding a plaque with the caption, "Thrilled to announce my promotion to senior VP and celebrating with the new beast." Below, a gleaming top-of-the-line luxury sedan was parked in front of a modern, glass-fronted office building. A cold, hard knot immediately formed in Alex's stomach. His breath hitched. He scrolled through Mark's celebratory comments, each congratulatory message feeling like a tiny pinprick. His own achievements, which moments before had felt substantial, suddenly seemed meager, almost inconsequential. His reliable family sedan, parked in the driveway, now appeared outdated, even humble. His life, despite its undeniable blessings of health, love, and a steady income, somehow felt lacking, overshadowed by Mark's apparent abundance. A voice in his head whispered, "Why not me? Did I make the wrong choices? Is this all I'm destined for?" The feeling wasn't about Mark, per se. Alex didn't wish Mark ill. It was about the uncomfortable, gnawing sense of his own perceived inadequacy, fueled by Mark's seemingly effortless ascent. This internal comparison, often unacknowledged and rarely spoken aloud, is the hallmark of envy. A silent poison silently consumed, leaving a bitter aftertaste in the soul. Envy, at its core, is the painful emotion caused by the desire for another person's possessions, qualities, or success. Unlike jealousy, which is a three-person dynamic where one fears losing a valued relationship or possession to a rival, e.g., fearing a friend might steal your romantic partner, envy is a two-person dynamic. It is singularly focused on what another has that we don't, and often what we believe we should have. It's not simply wanting what someone else has, it's frequently accompanied by a distinct disquiet, even distress, at their good fortune. This distress can manifest as a restless mind, a subtle resentment, or a persistent feeling of inferiority. From a psychological standpoint, envy is deeply intertwined with social comparison, a fundamental human tendency to evaluate ourselves against others. When this comparison leads to a feeling of inferiority, resentment, or a wish that the other person did not possess the envied attribute, or even that they somehow lose it. It transitions from a benign observation into the more destructive forms of envy. This essay explores envy not merely as a fleeting social emotion, but as a profound psychological pattern and a deep spiritual ailment. Quote 3. Examining its origins, manifestations, and pathways to healing and liberation through both scientific understanding and ancient wisdom, we will delve into the psychological underpinnings of envy, drawing from social comparison theory, cognitive psychology, neuroscience, and developmental perspectives to understand its mechanisms and impact on mental well-being. We will explore how envy, often hidden beneath layers of shame or denial, can subtly undermine self-worth, foster resentment, and impede genuine connection by creating a barrier of perceived competition and inadequacy between individuals. Its silent work can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, and a pervasive sense of dissatisfaction, even when external circumstances are favourable. Concurrently, we will explore envy through the lens of diverse spiritual traditions, recognizing its pervasive presence in human experience across cultures and millennia. Buddhist teachings on suffering, dukkha, and craving, tanha, illuminate how comparison and attachment to external validation fuel dissatisfaction, trapping individuals in a cycle of never-ending desire and inner turmoil. Christian contemplative wisdom, particularly the tradition of the 7 deadly sins, identifies envy as a profound spiritual failing that obstructs love and humility, corroding the soul's capacity for charity and seeing another's good as one's own harm. Islamic Sufi insights on hasad, destructive envy, emphasize the critical importance of purifying the heart and transcending the ego, nafs, warning that hasad not only harms the envier, but can also be a spiritual detriment to the envied, stressing the need for constant introspection and purity of intention. Hindu concepts of maya, illusion, and ahamkara, ego, help us understand how envy traps us in a false sense of separation and competition, keeping us bound to the illusory material world and preventing the realization of our true, interconnected spiritual nature beyond the ego's demands. Existential philosophy, too, offers perspectives on how envy can reflect a lack of authenticity and a flight from personal responsibility, becoming a symptom of an individual's refusal to embrace their own freedom and agency, instead projecting their unfulfilled desires onto others. By weaving these psychological and spiritual perspectives, this essay aims to provide a holistic understanding of envy, revealing how it poisons the individual and collective spirit, and offering practical pathways, both therapeutic and contemplative, to transform this destructive emotion into a catalyst for growth, compassion, and genuine contentment. We will first establish a comprehensive framework, examining the psychological origins and spiritual interpretations of envy, including its neurological correlates and its place in various sacred texts. Then we will explore its modern manifestations, particularly in the digital age, where social media's curated personas and constant display of perceived perfection often amplify comparison and fuel the envious mind. We will illustrate these concepts with brief examples from historical figures, contemporary case studies, and mythological narratives. Finally, we will present integrated practices, drawing from cognitive behavioral therapy for reshaping thought patterns, self-compassion for nurturing inner kindness, gratitude practices for shifting focus to abundance, and contemplative traditions like mindfulness for present moment awareness, metta, loving kindness, meditation for cultivating altruistic joy, and heart purification for spiritual cleansing, that offer pathways to dismantle envy's hold and cultivate a more expansive, generous, and truly flourishing inner life. This journey will invite us to confront this secret sickness, not with judgment, but with curiosity and a profound commitment to healing. The cold, hard knot that had tightened in Alex's stomach was not merely a fleeting discomfort. It was a visceral manifestation of an emotion far more pervasive and insidious than he could have consciously articulated. It was a familiar ache, one that many of us recognize, though we rarely name it, preferring to cloak it in euphemism or dismiss it as simple irritation. Yet, this unnamed feeling, this secret sickness, silently consumed him, eroding the quiet contentment he had felt just moments before. Have you ever felt that subtle shift? That moment when someone else's good news, an achievement, a new possession, instead of sparking joy or even indifference, ignites a tiny, unwelcome flame within you, a flame that whispers, "Why not me?" or "They don't deserve it." This is the insidious nature of envy, an emotion so deeply ingrained in the human psyche that it often operates beneath the radar of conscious recognition, a silent poison silently consumed. To truly confront this elusive adversary, we must first understand its precise contours, distinguishing it from its close kin. In everyday language, the terms envy and jealousy are often used interchangeably, yet in the realm of psychology and human experience, they represent fundamentally different emotional landscapes. This distinction is not mere semantic nitpicking. It is crucial for accurate self-diagnosis and ultimately for healing. Recall Alex's moment on the sofa. His discomfort stemmed from Mark's promotion and new car. Alex did not fear losing something he already possessed, nor was he concerned that Mark's success would jeopardize his relationship with his wife or family. His pain was entirely self-referential, a stark comparison between what he had and what Mark had. This illustrates the core dynamic of envy. Envy, at its heart, is a two-person emotion. It arises when an individual desires what another person possesses, perceiving themselves to be lacking that same desirable quality, object, or achievement. Its focus is on the coveted attribute of the other, and often it is accompanied by feelings of inferiority, resentment, and a wish that the other person did not possess the desired item, or that one could possess it instead. The feeling is often directed towards someone perceived as similar to oneself, a peer, a colleague, a sibling, making the comparison all the more poignant. The pain of envy is not derived from a threat to one's existing relationships, but from a perceived deficiency within oneself, a painful awareness of what one does not have. Jealousy, by contrast, is a three-person emotion. It typically involves the fear of losing something one already possesses, usually a valued relationship, romantic, platonic, or familial, to a rival. The classic scenario is a person fearing their partner's affections are being drawn away by another. Here, the focus is on protecting a valued possession or relationship from a perceived interloper. The emotions involved can range from anxiety and suspicion to anger and betrayal. The pain of jealousy is rooted in the threat of loss, of being replaced, of a bond being severed. Think of it this way. Envy. I want what you have. Two people, one desired object, attribute. Jealousy. I'm afraid of losing what I have to someone else. 3 people, 1 threatened relationship, possession. Alex was not jealous of Mark. He was envious. His internal monologue wasn't about protecting his marriage from Mark, but about the aching realization that Mark's career trajectory and material gains seemed to eclipse his own. This subtle but profound difference is the first step in unraveling the true nature of the secret sickness. The root system of envy, social comparison. Theory. Why are we so susceptible to this internal calculus of comparison? The answer lies deeply embedded in our social nature, a phenomenon extensively studied in psychology as social comparison theory. First proposed by Leon Festinger in the 1950s, this theory posits that human beings have an innate drive to evaluate their own opinions and abilities by comparing themselves to others. We are, fundamentally, social creatures who derive much of our self-worth and understanding from our place within a group. This comparison can manifest in 2 primary directions. 1. Upward social comparison. This occurs when we compare ourselves to someone perceived as superior to us in a particular domain. Alex comparing his career achievements to Mark's recent promotion is a prime example of upward social comparison. While this can sometimes be motivating, inspiring us to strive for improvement, it more often triggers feelings of inadequacy, frustration, and, crucially, envy. When the gap between our standing and that of the superior other feels too vast or unattainable, the motivating aspect can quickly dissolve into corrosive self-doubt and resentment. 2. Downward social comparison. This involves comparing ourselves to someone perceived as less fortunate or less capable. While this can sometimes boost self-esteem by making us feel better about our own circumstances, it can also lead to feelings of superiority, schadenfreude, or a false sense of security that prevents genuine growth. The problem with upward social comparison, particularly when it fuels envy, is that it often distorts our perception of reality. We tend to focus solely on the positive aspects of the other person's life, the quotient, while remaining acutely aware of all the perceived deficiencies in our own. We see Mark's new car and promotion, but not the long hours, the sacrifices, or the hidden stresses that might accompany his success. This skewed perspective creates an illusion of perfect lives elsewhere, intensifying our own feelings of lack. While social comparison theory illuminates the immediate psychological mechanisms, the propensity for envy likely has deeper evolutionary and developmental roots. From an evolutionary perspective, the ability to assess one's standing relative to others would have been crucial for survival and reproductive success within early human communities. Those who could accurately gauge their status, access to resources, and social standing might have been better positioned to thrive. In a world of limited resources, observing what others possessed and desiring it could have been a driver for innovation, competition, and ultimately survival. However, this same drive, when unchecked, transforms into the destructive force of envy. Developmentally, the seeds of envy are often sown early. Consider a child observing a sibling receive more attention or a more desirable toy. The primal cry of Chaka, quote 9, is an early manifestation of this comparative impulse. Children learn about fairness, justice, and their own worth through interactions with peers and caregivers. If a child consistently perceives themselves as receiving less, or if their self-worth becomes overly tied to external validation and comparison, the fertile ground for adult envy is cultivated. Early experiences of scarcity, perceived favoritism, or a focus on external achievements rather than intrinsic worth can all contribute to a heightened susceptibility to envious feelings later in life. Once triggered, envy doesn't merely reside as a single emotion. It initiates a cascade of cognitive distortions and emotional turmoil. For Alex, the initial cold, hard knot quickly blossomed into a complex internal experience. Cognitively, envy often leads to selective attention, focusing exclusively on what the envied person has and ignoring everything else. Distorted attribution, attributing the other's success to luck, unfair advantages, or even unethical means, rather than effort or skill. Conversely, one's own failures might be attributed to external factors, while successes are downplayed. Rumination, obsessively replaying the comparison in one's mind, feeding the feelings of inadequacy and resentment. Wish for misfortune. In its most malignant form, envy can manifest as schadenfreude in reverse, a secret desire for the envied person to experience misfortune, or for their good fortune to diminish. This is a dark corner of the human psyche, one that causes immense internal suffering for the one harbouring such thoughts. Emotionally, envy is a potent cocktail of resentment, bitterness towards the envied person for their success, inferiority, a profound sense of not being good enough, smart enough, or successful enough, shame, the desire to hide one's envious feelings, as they are often perceived as socially unacceptable or morally reprehensible, anger, directed either outward at the envied person or inward at oneself, sadness, despair, a feeling that one's own life is lacking or that one will never achieve what others have. This internal landscape is exhausting and destructive. It drains energy, corrodes self-esteem, and prevents genuine connection and appreciation for others' successes. In Alex's case, the catalyst for his envy was a digital one, a social media feed. This is not coincidental. The digital age, with its ubiquitous platforms, has created an unprecedented environment for the cultivation and amplification of envy. Social media in particular is a grand stage for upward social comparison. Users meticulously curate their online personas, presenting highlight reels of their lives, exotic vacations, career milestones, perfect families, luxury purchases. What we see are filtered, edited, and often exaggerated representations of reality. We rarely see the struggles, the mundane, the failures, or the anxieties that are an inherent part of every human experience. Consider the psychological impact. Constant exposure. Unlike previous generations where comparisons were limited to one's immediate social circle, the digital age exposes us to an almost infinite number of quote 11 lives, quote 12 careers, and quote 13 relationships. Anonymity, distance. The perceived distance and anonymity of online interactions can lower inhibitions, making it easier to engage in comparisons and harbour resentful thoughts without immediate social repercussions. Echo chambers. Algorithms often show us more of what we engage with, potentially creating echo chambers where we are repeatedly exposed to content that triggers our insecurities, thus reinforcing envious patterns. Instant gratification culture. The digital world fosters a culture of instant gratification and constant novelty, making it harder to appreciate one's own journey and progress when others' perceived quote 14s are constantly paraded. For Alex, Seeing Mark's carefully crafted post was not just an update. It was a curated challenge to his own sense of accomplishment. The digital screen acted as a magnifying glass, making Mark's success appear larger, brighter, and more immediate, while simultaneously shrinking Alex's own life into an inadequate shadow. This constant, often unconscious barrage of "15 lives" contributes significantly to the pervasive, yet often unacknowledged epidemic of envy in contemporary society. Understanding these origins and mechanisms is the first crucial step in dismantling envy's power. By recognizing how it takes root, how it distorts our perceptions, and how modern life exacerbates its grip, we begin the process of pulling back the veil from this secret sickness. The journey ahead will explore not only its destructive consequences, but also the profound pathways to transforming this corrosive emotion into a catalyst for self-awareness, growth, and genuine inner peace. For only by truly seeing envy can we begin to heal its silent poison. The cold, hard knot that formed in Alex's gut after seeing Mark's digital triumph was more than a fleeting discomfort. It was a symptom of a deeper malaise, a silent poison silently consumed, slowly eroding his internal landscape. Envy, as we have seen, is not merely an unpleasant feeling. It is a corrosive force with profound and often devastating consequences for the individual and their relationships. Its insidious nature lies in its capacity to operate beneath the surface, gnawing at the foundations of self-worth, while presenting a veneer of normalcy to the outside world. Have you ever found yourself caught in this internal struggle, where the achievements of another, far from inspiring joy or admiration, instead trigger a cascade of negativity within your own mind? This is the fertile ground where envy sows its most destructive seeds. The immediate aftermath for Alex was a palpable loss of joy in his own life. His once comforting home, his loving family, his stable career, all now seemed diminished, tarnished by the glaring light of Mark's perceived superiority. This is a common and cruel irony of envy. It doesn't just make you want what someone else has, it makes you devalue what you already possess. The grass on the other side doesn't just look greener, it makes your own lawn appear barren and neglected. The internal impact of unchecked envy is relentless. It fosters chronic dissatisfaction, a gnawing sense that one is perpetually lacking, falling short. This dissatisfaction often morphs into rumination, where the mind obsessively replays the perceived disparity, creating a feedback loop of misery. Alex found himself replaying Mark's post, imagining the conversations, the accolades, the luxurious feel of the new car, each thought tightening the knot in his stomach. This constant internal comparison breeds resentment, not just towards the object of envy, but often towards the self for being 17. It can manifest as a deep-seated bitterness, a cynicism that taints all experiences, making it difficult to find genuine happiness or celebrate personal milestones, however significant. Over time, this sustained emotional corrosion can lead to symptoms akin to depression and anxiety, as the individual becomes trapped in a cycle of self-criticism and external fixation. Beyond the internal turmoil, envy can subtly, or sometimes overtly, influence behavior. While Alex, a decent and well-meaning individual, would never actively sabotage Mark, his envy might manifest in more subtle ways. He might find it difficult to genuinely congratulate Mark, offering lukewarm praise or changing the subject. He might experience a secret, fleeting sense of satisfaction should Mark encounter a setback, a phenomenon known as schadenfreude, the perverse pleasure derived from another's misfortune. This is a dark facet of envy, where the desire isn't just to possess what another has, but for the other to lose it, thereby levelling the playing field. In more extreme cases, envy can lead to passive aggression, social withdrawal, or even active malice, as individuals seek to diminish or undermine those they envy. The very fabric of relationships can fray under the strain of this unspoken animosity. Consider the relational impact. How can one maintain authentic connections when secretly resenting another's success? Envy creates distance, fostering an inability to truly celebrate the triumphs of friends, family, or colleagues. It replaces genuine empathy with a critical gaze, transforming potential allies into perceived rivals. The warmth of shared joy is replaced by the chill of comparison, isolating the individual within their own self-imposed prison of inadequacy. Yet, crucial to understanding this secret sickness is recognizing the fundamental illusion at its heart. The lives we envy, particularly those curated and broadcast on digital platforms, are almost invariably incomplete narratives. What Alex saw on Mark's social media feed was a highlight reel, a meticulously edited montage of success. He saw the promotion, the car, the celebratory smiles. He did not see the late nights, the sacrifices, the personal struggles, the moments of self-doubt, or the sheer luck that might have contributed to Mark's achievements. This selective focus is a hallmark of cognitive distortion, a common trap of envious thinking. We construct an idealized version of another's reality, then contrast it with the messy, unedited, full spectrum of our own lives, inevitably finding ourselves wanting. It is precisely at this juncture, when the weight of envy becomes unbearable, when its destructive patterns are recognized, however dimly, that the first flicker of potential healing emerges. The pathway to liberation from envy begins not with grand gestures, but with a profound act of self-honesty, awareness, and acknowledgement. This is perhaps the most challenging step, for admitting envy requires confronting a feeling often deemed shameful, a confession of inadequacy. Who wants to admit they resent another's good fortune? It feels petty, ignoble, but denial only strengthens envy's grip, allowing it to fester in the shadows. To truly begin healing, one must courageously articulate the feeling, even if only to oneself. Quote 19. For Alex, this moment of acknowledgement began subtly, a quiet questioning that broke through the din of his self-reproach. He had spent days replaying Mark's post, each iteration fueling his discontent. But one evening, as he watched his daughter laugh joyfully at a cartoon, a thought pricked through his despondency. Why am I letting Mark's life dictate how I feel about my own? It wasn't a full understanding, not yet, but it was a crucial shift, from merely feeling bad to beginning to question the source of that bad feeling. It was a nascent attempt to shift from the reactive, quote 20, to the more introspective and potentially transformative, quote 21. This pivotal shift in perspective is the cornerstone of moving beyond envy. Once acknowledged, the emotion can be observed, dissected, and ultimately reframed. One of the most potent antidotes to envy is gratitude. It is virtually impossible to feel genuinely grateful and deeply envious simultaneously. Shifting focus from what one lacks to what one already possesses can dramatically alter one's emotional landscape. For Alex, the laughter of his daughter, the warmth of his home, the stability of his job, these were not insignificant blessings. By consciously directing attention to these aspects of his life, even for a few moments, he could begin to loosen envy's stranglehold. Alongside gratitude, self-compassion becomes an essential practice. Envy thrives on self-criticism, on the belief that one is inherently less worthy. Counteracting this requires treating oneself with the same kindness and understanding one would offer a dear friend. Recognizing that everyone, including Mark, faces challenges, struggles, and moments of doubt helps to normalize one's own human experience and reduce the harsh judgment that fuels envy. Alex, in his internal dialogue, could begin to acknowledge his own efforts, his own achievements, rather than solely measuring them against Mark's external markers of success. Furthermore, a conscious effort to understand others' journeys beyond the superficial can be profoundly liberating. Alex didn't know the full story behind Mark's promotion. Was it years of relentless grinding? Did he make significant personal sacrifices? Did he face intense pressure? Recognizing that success is often the culmination of unseen efforts, setbacks, and a degree of fortune, rather than an effortless ascent, can humanize the object of envy and demystify their achievements. It allows for the possibility of genuine admiration rather than corrosive resentment. This leads to a crucial redefinition: redefining success. Our society often equates success solely with external metrics, wealth, status, possessions. But what if true success is measured by internal fulfillment, by the quality of relationships, by personal growth, by contributing meaningfully to the world, by living authentically according to one's own values? When Alex began to ponder this, his rigid definition of success, previously dominated by Mark's career advancement and luxury car, started to soften. He began to consider what truly mattered to him, independent of external validation. Practical strategies emerge from these foundational shifts. Mindfulness offers a powerful tool. Instead of being consumed by envious thoughts, one learns to observe them without judgment. Ah, there's that feeling of envy again, one might note, rather than immediately spiraling into self-pity or resentment. This creates a psychological distance, preventing the emotion from overwhelming the self. For Alex, this might mean simply noticing the knot in his stomach or the racing thoughts, without immediately attaching a narrative of inadequacy to them. Limiting exposure to triggers, especially the highly curated content of social media, is another vital step. While completely disengaging might not be feasible or desirable, consciously reducing time spent scrolling or unfollowing accounts that consistently trigger envious feelings can significantly reduce the fuel for the fire. Alex could make a conscious decision to spend less time on social media, or to be more discerning about whose updates he truly engaged with. Crucially, energy previously expended on comparison can be redirected towards personal growth and development. Instead of lamenting what Mark has, Alex could ask himself, what skills do I want to develop? What personal goals can I set for myself, independent of anyone else's achievements? This transforms a destructive, outward-focused energy into a constructive, inward-focused drive. Finally, and perhaps most beautifully, the journey from envy can lead to cultivating admiration. When the sting of comparison is lessened, it becomes possible to genuinely appreciate another's accomplishments, to learn from their journey, and even to be inspired by their success. This transformation moves the individual from a state of wanting what another has to a state of appreciating what is possible, and then channeling that appreciation into one's own aspirations. It is the shift from "why not me" to "if they can achieve that, what might I be capable of?" For Alex, the path was just beginning. The knot in his gut hadn't entirely dissolved, but it had loosened. The incessant rumination had quieted, replaced by moments of quiet introspection. As he sat on his sofa, the glow of his phone now off, he looked at his daughter, truly saw her, and for the first time since Mark's post, a genuine, unburdened smile touched his lips. It was a small victory, a glimmer of hope in the ongoing battle against the secret sickness of the soul, a tentative step towards healing and liberation. He was beginning to understand that freedom from envy lay not in having what Mark had, but in finding contentment and purpose within his own unique narrative. The glimmer of contentment Alex had experienced was a fragile dawn, a promise of light that could easily be obscured by the returning shadows. He had begun to appreciate the quiet rhythm of his home life, the warmth of his daughter's hand in his, the genuine satisfaction of a task well done at work. The knot in his gut, once a constant companion, had indeed loosened, allowing him moments of unburdened joy. He had begun to understand that true peace was not the absence of external challenges, but the presence of internal fortitude. Yet, the journey of healing from envy, this secret sickness of the soul, is rarely a linear ascent. It is often a winding path, fraught with relapses and the insidious resurgence of old patterns. Envy, you see, does not simply vanish because it has been acknowledged. It is deeply ingrained, often a default setting for an ego perpetually scanning the horizon for threats and comparisons. Like a chronic ailment, it may recede into remission, only to flare up again when triggered by a new stimulus, a fresh testament to someone else's perceived ascendancy. Have you ever felt the subtle shift, the almost imperceptible tightening in your chest, even after you thought you had made peace with your own circumstances? This is the ego, ever vigilant, ever prone to comparison, whispering doubts and reigniting the old flames of inadequacy. For Alex, this resurgence arrived not through the curated highlight reel of social media, but in the more immediate, tangible realm of his professional life. A month after his initial breakthrough, an email landed in his inbox, announcing the promotion of his colleague Sarah to a new, highly visible leadership role. Sarah, a peer with whom Alex had often collaborated and whose work he respected, was now elevated to a position he had privately coveted, a role he felt his own diligent efforts and experience had equally prepared him for. The news hit him with a familiar yet distinct pang. It wasn't the cold, hard knot of before, not the paralyzing despair. This time it was a sharp, hot jab, quickly followed by a dull ache of unfairness. Why her? His mind immediately queried. What did she do that I didn't? He scrolled through the announcement, his eyes scanning for details, almost unconsciously seeking justification for his own perceived oversight. He felt a fleeting resentment, a bitter taste in his mouth, even as he simultaneously knew, intellectually, that Sarah was capable and deserving. This internal dissonance, the conscious acknowledgement of another's merit battling the unconscious sting of personal slight, is a hallmark of envy's persistent grip. This is the insidious nature of envy. It thrives on the perception of scarcity. In a scarcity mindset, every gain by another is seen as a loss for oneself. If Sarah gets the promotion, it means there's one less promotion for Alex. If Mark gets a luxury car, it means Alex's car is somehow diminished. This zero-sum game, however, is a cognitive distortion, a mental trap that limits our ability to celebrate others and, more importantly, to recognize the boundless opportunities and unique paths available to each individual. The world, in truth, operates on principles of abundance, but envy blinds us to this reality, trapping us in a cycle of perceived lack. As Alex sat at his desk, the email still open, he felt the familiar pull of rumination. He started to mentally catalogue his own achievements, his tenure, his contributions, stacking them against Sarah's, seeking to prove, if only to himself, that he was equally, if not more, worthy. He felt the temptation to diminish Sarah's accomplishment, to find flaws in her approach, to whisper to himself that perhaps it was quote 27 or quote 28. This subtle act of denigration, this quiet undermining of another's success, is one of envy's most corrosive manifestations, a desperate attempt to elevate oneself by pulling others down, even if only in the privacy of one's own mind. Yet something was different this time. The insidious whispers of envy were louder, but so too was the quieter, more resolute voice of his newfound awareness. He recognized the pattern, the familiar emotional cascade. He felt the tightness in his chest, the flush of indignation, but he also recognized the choice before him. Would he succumb to the old narrative, allowing Sarah's success to invalidate his own? Or would he engage the tools he had begun to cultivate? This moment of recognition, this conscious interception of the envious impulse, is a critical juncture in the journey toward liberation. It is the practice of mindfulness applied directly to the emotional landscape of the soul. Can you observe the envy without judgment? Can you acknowledge its presence without allowing it to dictate your actions or define your self-worth? This is not about suppressing the feeling, which only drives it deeper, but about observing it, understanding its roots, and choosing a different response. The narrator's voice, ever present, reminds us that the true antidote to envy lies not merely in distracting ourselves from comparison, but in the profound cultivation of intrinsic value. Our society, particularly in the digital age, relentlessly pushes external metrics of success: titles, possessions, followers, accolades. These external validations, while momentarily satisfying, are ultimately fleeting and conditional. They are built on a foundation of shifting sands, constantly vulnerable to the next comparison, the next perceived lack. True liberation, therefore, demands a radical reorientation, a conscious decision to anchor our self-worth in internal principles, in our unique purpose, our core values, and our inherent dignity as human beings, independent of what others possess or achieve. What truly defines your success? Is it the corner office or the impact you make? Is it the luxury car or the freedom it offers? Is it the public acclaim or the quiet satisfaction of mastering a craft, nurturing a relationship, or contributing to something larger than yourself? When we define success purely by external markers, we outsource our happiness and peace to the unpredictable whims of the world and the achievements of others. When we define it intrinsically, based on our values, our growth, and our contributions, we reclaim our agency and build an unshakable inner citadel against the ravages of envy. Alex took a deep breath, pushing away from his desk. He closed his eyes, allowing the initial surge of resentment to wash over him, observing it like a passing cloud. This is envy, he acknowledged internally. This is the old pattern trying to reassert itself. He felt the uncomfortable heat in his face, the slight tremor in his hands, but he did not allow himself to spiral into the familiar narrative of self-pity or resentment towards Sarah. Instead, he consciously engaged the antidotes he had begun to learn. First, self-compassion. He gently reminded himself that it was okay to feel disappointed, to feel a pang of ambition unfulfilled. It didn't make him a bad person. His feelings were valid, but they did not have to control him. Quote 29, he murmured to himself. Quote 30. This act of gentle acceptance rather than harsh self-criticism created a small space, a moment of respite from the ego's relentless demands. Next, gratitude, but applied with renewed intention. He didn't just passively recall things he was thankful for, he actively sought them out. He thought of his current role, the projects he was leading, the respect he did command from his team. He thought of the flexibility his current position offered, which allowed him to be home for his daughter's bedtime, a privilege he knew Sarah, in her new, more demanding role, might have to sacrifice. He consciously pivoted his focus from what he lacked to what he possessed, not as a means of comparison, but as an affirmation of his own unique, valuable life. Then came the crucial step, reframing success. He considered what truly motivated him in his career. Was it the title or the challenge of problem solving? Was it the recognition or the satisfaction of guiding his team to achieve a shared goal? He realized that while the promotion would have been a nice external validation, his deeper satisfaction came from the process of his work, the intellectual stimulation, and the positive impact he had on his colleagues and clients. He recognized that his current role, while not the one Sarah now held, offered him ample opportunities for these intrinsic rewards. He was still contributing meaningfully, still growing, still learning. His personal definition of enough began to solidify, less dependent on external benchmarks and more on internal fulfillment. Finally, and perhaps most profoundly, Alex consciously chose to cultivate empathy. He pictured Sarah, not as a rival, but as a fellow human being on her own journey. He considered the long hours she had undoubtedly put in, the sacrifices she might have made, the pressures she would now face in her elevated role. He remembered her dedication, her sharp intellect, and her genuine passion for their company's mission. He imagined the joy she must be feeling, the culmination of her own hard work. This deliberate shift from a stance of rivalry to one of shared humanity began to dissolve the last vestiges of bitterness. When he finally walked over to her desk, a genuine smile touched his lips as he extended his hand. Quote, 32, he said, his voice steady and sincere. Quote, 33. The words felt true. The internal knot, which had briefly tightened, now truly dissolved, replaced by a quiet sense of peace, a feeling of self-respect that had nothing to do with external validation. He hadn't just suppressed the envy, he had transmuted it. He had chosen abundance over scarcity, empathy over rivalry, intrinsic value over external comparison. This continuous work, this vigilant tending to the garden of the soul, is the path to sustained liberation from envy. It is not a one-time victory, but a series of conscious choices, a daily practice of redirecting focus, cultivating gratitude, and grounding one's self-worth in an unwavering internal compass. By consistently applying these antidotes, we dismantle the power of the quote 34. Not by denying its existence, but by choosing to nurture a different, more resilient, and ultimately more joyful narrative for our lives. The journey is ongoing, but with each conscious step, the grip of envy weakens, and the true light of authentic contentment shines brighter. The dissolution of envy, as Alex had experienced with Sarah's promotion, was not a singular, decisive victory, but rather a testament to the power of sustained vigilance. It was akin to tending a garden. Weeds, though pulled, would inevitably attempt to resurface, requiring ongoing attention and care. The initial triumph had provided Alex with a profound sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction that transcended the fleeting gratification of external validation. He had chosen peace over poison, empathy over resentment, and in doing so had deepened his connection to his authentic self. Yet, the human psyche is a complex terrain, and envy, the Verset, quote 35 said, possesses an insidious adaptability. It rarely announces its return with the same overt intensity. Instead, it often reappears in more subtle, almost imperceptible guises, whispering doubts and planting seeds of discontent where genuine joy once flourished. Have you ever noticed how a moment of pure happiness for a friend can be swiftly followed by a fleeting, almost imperceptible pang of, quote, 36, or how a seemingly innocuous piece of news about someone else's good fortune can leave a faint, bitter aftertaste, even when your own life is objectively thriving? This is envy's cunning, its capacity to camouflage itself within the fabric of everyday thought, rendering it harder to detect and, consequently, more challenging to disarm. Psychologically, these subtle manifestations of envy often stem from a deeply ingrained scarcity mindset, a primal fear that another's gain inherently diminishes one's own potential or worth. This mindset is particularly vulnerable to the constant barrage of curated successes presented on digital platforms, where the highlight reel of everyone else's life becomes an unwitting benchmark for one's own. It is not merely about desiring what another possesses. It can evolve into a quiet discomfort with their very being successful, a subconscious wish for their light to dim so that one's own might shine brighter. This is the shadow side of comparison, a silent erosion of empathy that can manifest as lukewarm congratulations, a tendency to find fault in others' achievements, or even a perverse, unacknowledged satisfaction in their setbacks, a phenomenon known as Schadenfreude, the pleasure derived from another's misfortune, which is often a close cousin to envy. For Alex, this next wave of subtle envy arrived not through a direct professional challenge, but through a seemingly innocuous update from his sister Emily. She called one evening bubbling with excitement to share that her eldest daughter Maya had received an early acceptance to an Ivy League university, a dream school for Maya and a source of immense pride for Emily and her husband. Alex listened, offering his congratulations with genuine warmth. Maya was a bright, hard-working kid, and he was genuinely happy for her. He hung up the phone, a smile still lingering from Emily's infectious joy. But as he settled back onto his sofa, the familiar quiet contentment began to fray at the edges. A subtle agitation stirred within him. His own son, Leo, was still years away from college applications, But an unbidden thought crept in. Would Leo ever achieve something so unequivocally prestigious? Suddenly, his own children's excellent grades, their blossoming talents, and their happy, well-adjusted lives felt ordinary. Not less, exactly, but somehow lacking that singular, shining achievement that Maya had secured. He found himself mentally cataloguing Leo's strengths and weaknesses, weighing them against an imagined future application, and a quiet anxiety began to coil in his stomach. It wasn't resentment towards Maya or Emily. It was a self-directed doubt, a fear that his own, quote 38, might not measure up, projected into a future that was still years away. This was a different beast than the envy he'd felt towards Mark's promotion, or Sarah's career advancement. This was a more intimate familial comparison, deeply intertwined with his identity as a father and his hopes for his children. It wasn't about taking something from Maya, it was about a sudden, acute awareness of what his own children might not have, or what he might not be able to provide or facilitate. The joy he had felt for his niece had been momentarily eclipsed by a quiet, self-centered anxiety. Alex recognized the familiar signature of envy, albeit in a new, more nuanced form. He felt the subtle knot in his gut, the restless mental churn, the way his mind was already constructing hypothetical scenarios of future disappointment. He understood now that envy wasn't just about coveting possessions or positions. It could be about coveting a perceived future, a potential, a story of success that wasn't his own. He consciously intercepted the thought spiral. This is not about Maya, he reminded himself. This is about my own anxieties, my own comparisons. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in the present moment. Leo was upstairs, probably engrossed in a video game, happy and healthy. His daughter, Chloe, was drawing at the kitchen table. These were real, tangible blessings, not future projections or external validations. He began to apply his practiced antidotes. First, mindful observation. He named the feeling, "This is envy, cloaked in parental anxiety." He acknowledged the discomfort without judgment, allowing it to simply be, rather than fighting against it. Second, self-compassion. He recognized that it was natural to have hopes for one's children, and equally natural for those hopes to sometimes trigger feelings of inadequacy when confronted with others' achievements. He offered himself kindness, reminding himself that his love and support for his children were not contingent on their future Ivy League acceptances. Then came the crucial shift, cultivating genuine admiration and shared joy. Instead of allowing his mind to drift towards future comparisons, he deliberately refocused on Maya. He pictured her beaming face, remembered her dedication to her studies, her passion for debate. He allowed himself to feel proud of her achievement, to genuinely celebrate her hard work and the doors it would open for her. He thought of Emily's joy, of the years of support and encouragement she and her husband had poured into Maya. He consciously extended his empathy, not just to Maya, but to his sister and brother-in-law, sharing in their triumph. This shift was not merely an intellectual exercise, it was an emotional reorientation. It involved actively choosing to amplify the positive feelings of shared success, rather than allowing the negative undertones of comparison to take root. It was about recognizing that another's success does not diminish one's own, and in fact can often serve as an inspiration. the authoritative voice of psychology reminds us that true liberation from envy lies not just in managing its symptoms, but in fundamentally transforming the internal landscape that gives rise to it. This transformation involves a deliberate cultivation of what can be termed quote forties or quote fortiofin. It is the capacity to genuinely rejoice in the good fortune of others, to feel their happiness as if it were in part one's own. This shift is profound because it challenges the scarcity mindset at its core, replacing it with an abundance mentality. When we truly believe there is enough success, enough happiness, enough love to go around, the impulse to compare and covet diminishes. This is not to say that all striving ceases. Healthy ambition and a desire for personal growth are vital. The distinction lies in the source of that ambition. Is it fueled by a desire to outshine others, or by an intrinsic drive for self-improvement and contribution? Is it a zero-sum game, or an expansive journey? Alex found that by consciously celebrating Maya's success, by allowing himself to feel genuine happiness for his niece and sister, the gnawing anxiety about Leo's future slowly began to recede. His children were unique individuals, charting their own paths and their worth, and his worth as a parent was not a matter of competitive comparison. He felt a resurgence of gratitude for the simple, profound joys of his own family life, for the laughter in his home, for the warmth of his wife's hand in his. The path to healing from envy, therefore, is an ongoing process of choosing expansion over contraction. It is a daily commitment to recognizing the interconnectedness of human experience, understanding that when one person thrives, it can elevate us all. It is about actively seeking out opportunities to celebrate others, to offer genuine praise, and to find inspiration in their journeys rather than diminishing them to elevate ourselves. For Alex, this subtle encounter with envy had deepened his understanding. The sickness was not just in coveting what others had, but in the internal narrative that suggested his own life was somehow incomplete without it. The liberation was in recognizing that completeness resided within, independent of external metrics or the shining achievements of others. It was in the quiet, steady affirmation of his own unique blessings, and the courageous choice to share in the joy of the world around him. The quiet triumph Alex had felt after embracing Maya's success with genuine empathetic joy was a significant milestone, a testament to the arduous internal work he had undertaken. He had begun to understand that liberation from envy was not a singular victory, but an ongoing process, a continuous transformation. Yet, the years quote 42 remained. The persistent vigilance required to maintain this inner peace against envy's subtle, often insidious resurgence. Envy, like a hardy perennial, seemed capable of adapting, finding new soil in which to root itself, even within the most cultivated internal landscapes. Indeed, the journey of understanding and mitigating envy is rarely a linear progression toward a definitive end. Instead, it is a cyclical engagement, a constant dance between recognition and response. Each layer of self-awareness peeled back reveals deeper, more nuanced forms of comparison, often rooted in fundamental questions of identity, purpose, and worth. The initial battles against material envy or professional rivalry, while potent, often serve as gateways to confronting more existential forms of comparison, a yearning not for what others have, but for what they appear to be. Have you ever found yourself observing someone, not for their possessions or accolades, but for an elusive quality they seem to embody, a profound sense of peace, an effortless creativity, an unwavering dedication to a passion, or perhaps a radiant authenticity that seems to flow from their very essence. This is where envy moves beyond the tangible, venturing into the realm of the intangible, the deeply personal, and often the most challenging to confront. This is the envy of being, a coveting of another's perceived inner state or way of existing in the world, which can stir anxieties about one's own unfulfilled potential or compromised integrity. Alex was about to encounter this very form of envy. Weeks after his breakthrough with Maya, a chance encounter brought him face to face with David, an old college friend he hadn't seen in over a decade. They met at a local coffee shop, a spontaneous reunion orchestrated by a mutual acquaintance. As they settled into their conversation, Alex noticed that David, while perhaps not exhibiting the overt markers of corporate success like Mark or Sarah, radiated an unmistakable aura of contentment. David had pursued a path far removed from the corporate ladder. He had spent years working with a small non-profit focused on environmental conservation, often living modestly, travelling to remote regions, and dedicating himself to a cause he deeply believed in. Now he was back in their hometown, running a small independent bookstore, curating a collection of eclectic titles, and hosting community events. His clothes were simple, his car modest, and his home, as Alex later learned, was a cozy apartment above his shop. Yet, there was a light in David's eyes, a quiet confidence in his voice, and a palpable sense of purpose that seemed to emanate from him. He spoke of his work with genuine passion, of his small community with warmth, and of his life with a serene acceptance. As Alex listened, a familiar, unwelcome sensation began to stir within him. It wasn't the cold, hard knot he'd felt for Mark's promotion, nor the sharp sting of injustice he'd experienced with Sarah's. This was different, more subtle, almost a wistful ache. It was a feeling of inadequacy, a quiet questioning of his own life choices. Alex had a stable career, a loving family, a comfortable home, all the things he had consciously worked for and achieved. But in David's presence, these achievements suddenly felt heavy. They felt like obligations, like a well-trodden path that, while safe and secure, perhaps lacked the vibrant authenticity David exuded. Had he chosen the right path, Alex wondered? Had he sacrificed his own passions, his own deeper calling, for the sake of security and societal expectations? David wasn't just doing something meaningful. He was meaning itself, embodied. Alex found himself envying not David's bookstore or his travels, but his apparent alignment with his true self, his unwavering sense of purpose, his seeming freedom from the internal pressures that often plagued Alex. This form of envy, the envy of being, is particularly potent because it strikes at the core of our identity. It's not about external possessions but internal states, perceived virtues, or a way of existing that we believe we lack. It can manifest as a yearning for another's perceived courage, creativity, wisdom, or inner peace. When we encounter someone who appears to embody these qualities effortlessly, it can trigger a profound sense of personal deficit, leading us to question our own authenticity and the very fabric of our chosen lives. This is envy's most sophisticated guise, often masked by admiration, yet subtly undermining our self-worth by suggesting that another's inner landscape is more vibrant, more purposeful, more real than our own. The insidious nature of this, quote 43, lies in its ability to hijack our sense of self-authorship. Instead of inspiring us to cultivate these qualities within ourselves, it often leads to a debilitating comparison that diminishes our own journey. We might dismiss our own efforts, invalidate our unique experiences, and fall into the trap of believing that true fulfillment is an external commodity possessed by others, rather than an internal state cultivated through conscious choice and consistent effort. Alex thankfully had built a foundation of self-awareness. He recognized the familiar pang, albeit in a new guise. He noticed the tendency to romanticize David's life, to gloss over any potential struggles or sacrifices, and to project onto him an idealized version of effortless contentment. He knew this was a distortion, a trick of the envious mind to magnify the perceived strengths of another while simultaneously diminishing his own. He began, as he had learned, with mindful observation. He acknowledged the feeling without judgment. Quote 44. He silently noted. Quote 45. He didn't chastise himself for feeling it. Instead, he gently inquired into its roots. What specifically about David's life was triggering this? It wasn't the lack of a promotion, but the perceived presence of purpose, the absence of internal conflict, the ease with which David seemed to inhabit his own skin. Next, Alex turned to self-compassion. He reminded himself that his journey was his own, shaped by his unique circumstances, values, and choices. There was no single, right path to fulfillment. His dedication to his family, his contributions at work, his personal growth, these were all valid and meaningful aspects of his life. To invalidate them in comparison to David's path would be to deny his own reality and diminish his own efforts. He acknowledged the human desire for purpose and authenticity, understanding it as a universal yearning, not a personal failing. But mindful observation and self-compassion, while crucial, were not enough to fully address this deeper, more existential envy. This form of envy demanded a more profound engagement with his own values and a conscious act of self-authorship. Alex realized he needed to actively define what quote 47 and quote 48 meant for him within the context of his own life. Over the following days, Alex embarked on a period of intense introspection. He wasn't going to quit his job and open a bookstore, nor would he abandon his family for a non-profit in a remote village. His life was built, and it was a life he genuinely loved, despite its occasional challenges. The question was not how to be David, but how to be more authentically Alex. He started by identifying the moments in his own life where he felt most aligned, most purposeful. It was often during moments of deep connection with his children, teaching them a new skill or listening intently to their stories. It was in the quiet satisfaction of solving a complex problem at work, knowing his contribution made a tangible difference. It was in his personal hobbies, like tending his small garden or reading a thought-provoking book, where he felt a sense of calm and engagement. He began to consciously weave these moments into the fabric of his daily life, not as escapes, but as integral components of his personal definition of fulfillment. He started dedicating specific time each week to truly be present with his family, putting away his phone, engaging without distraction. He sought out projects at work that aligned more closely with his personal values, even if they weren't the most. Quote 49. He rediscovered a joy in learning and creation, signing up for an online course in creative writing, something he had always wanted to do but deemed. Quote 50. This process was not about abandoning his current life, but about infusing it with greater intention and authenticity. It was about recognizing that purpose is not solely found in grand gestures or unconventional paths, but can be cultivated in the everyday, in the conscious choices we make, and in the values we prioritize. It was about understanding that fulfillment is not a singular, external template, but a unique mosaic assembled from our individual experiences, passions, and contributions. The narrative voice whispered, "Have you considered that the qualities you admire in others are often echoes of your own latent potential? That the yearning you feel is not for another's life, but for the full expression of your own?" Alex began to see David not as a source of inadequacy, but as a mirror reflecting a deeper aspiration within himself. He could genuinely appreciate David's path without diminishing his own. He learned to celebrate David's commitment to purpose, understanding that such commitment, in its myriad forms, enriches the world for everyone. This shift was a profound act of liberation, moving him from comparison to inspiration, from scarcity to a mindset of abundance where diverse forms of fulfillment could coexist and thrive. The ongoing vigilance, then, transformed from a defensive posture against envy's attack into an active practice of self-discovery and self-authorship. It became a commitment to continuously define and redefine what a meaningful life looked like for him, rather than allowing external comparisons to dictate his internal compass. True liberation from envy, Alex realized, was not about eradicating the emotion entirely, but about developing the wisdom and tools to navigate its inevitable resurgence, transforming its challenging energy into a catalyst for deeper self-understanding and more authentic living. It was an ongoing journey, a continuous act of choosing his own story, day by day, moment by moment. The secret sickness of the soul could be healed, not by avoiding all triggers, but by consciously crafting an antidote from within, grounded in unwavering self-acceptance and the courage to live one's own truth. The journey toward liberation from envy, as Alex had come to understand, was not a linear ascent to a peak from which one could survey a landscape entirely free of shadows. Rather, it was an ongoing navigation of a complex emotional terrain, where new valleys and hidden pathways constantly emerged, even for the most vigilant of travellers. The year quote 51 did not simply vanish, it transformed, adapted, and resurfaced in more sophisticated guises, testing the very foundations of one's hard-won inner peace. The persistent vigilance required was not a burden, but an essential practice, a form of spiritual hygiene against the subtle toxins that could still infiltrate the mind. Have you ever found yourself in a state of quiet contentment, only to have it subtly eroded by a comparison that wasn't about possessions or promotions, but something far more intangible, more existential? This is the insidious nature of envy's deeper manifestations, a whisper that questions not your having, but your being. For Alex, the initial acidic burn of Mark's success had long since cooled into a manageable ember, and the professional rivalry with Sarah had been transmuted into genuine camaraderie. Even the parental anxieties stirred by Maya's Ivy League acceptance had found their resolution in empathetic joy and a redefined sense of familial fulfillment. He had built a robust internal framework, a mental bulwark against the most overt assaults of envious comparison. He practiced gratitude daily, cultivated self-compassion, and consciously chose to define his success intrinsically rather than by external metrics. He believed he was, finally, genuinely free. Then came Ben. Alex hadn't thought much about Ben since college. Ben, a quiet, unassuming fellow, had faded into the background of Alex's memory, a peripheral character in the grand narrative of his own life. But the digital realm, ever the curator of inconvenient truths and unexpected comparisons, brought Ben back into sharp focus. A shared acquaintance posted a link to an article celebrating Ben's latest endeavour, a non-profit organisation dedicated to providing sustainable energy solutions to underserved communities globally. The article was effusive, painting Ben as a visionary, a humanitarian, a man of profound purpose whose life was a testament to altruism and impactful change. Accompanying the text was a photograph of Ben, smiling genuinely, surrounded by children in a sun-drenched village, his hands clasped with a local elder. He radiated an undeniable aura of moral conviction and selfless dedication. Alex found himself staring at the screen, a familiar, unsettling sensation coiling in his gut. It wasn't the sharp pang of wanting Ben's lifestyle or his specific achievements. Alex enjoyed his stable career, his comfortable home, his loving family. He didn't suddenly wish to abandon it all for a life of global humanitarianism. Yet, there it was, a dull, persistent ache of inadequacy. Ben wasn't just successful, he was good. He was making a difference. He was contributing to the greater good on a scale that dwarfed Alex's own contributions, which in that moment felt utterly trivial. This was a new frontier for envy, a more refined and insidious variant that we might call moral envy, or existential impact envy. It is the yearning not for another's possessions or status, but for their perceived moral standing, their visible impact on the world, their undeniable sense of purpose and contribution that seems to transcend mere self-interest. It is the secret desire to be seen, both by oneself and by others, as fundamentally better, more virtuous, more aligned with a universal good. This form of envy is particularly challenging because it can masquerade as a noble aspiration. I wish I could do more good, Alex thought, but beneath that seemingly virtuous sentiment lay the uncomfortable truth. I wish I were the one being celebrated for doing so much good. This envy doesn't target material wealth or superficial accolades. It targets the very core of one's self-worth, questioning the meaning and impact of one's own life choices. It taps into a primal human need for significance, for making a mark, for contributing to something larger than oneself. In a world increasingly saturated with narratives of social impact, performative altruism, and the constant broadcast of Femme quote 52, the fertile ground for moral envy expands exponentially. Have you ever scrolled through social media, encountering stories of individuals who seem to effortlessly embody compassion, activism, or profound wisdom, and felt a quiet, uncomfortable sting of comparison, not against their possessions, but against their perceived moral excellence or societal contribution? This is the insidious nature of moral envy, a subtle poison that convinces us that our own quiet contributions are insufficient, our own ethical compass less true, our own lives less meaningful. Alex recognized the pattern immediately, albeit with a deeper sense of frustration. He had thought he was past this. He had done the work. Yet, the tendrils of comparison still found a way to latch onto his psyche, now targeting his sense of ethical worth. He observed his thoughts. Am I truly making a difference? Is my life meaningful enough? Am I contributing to the world in a way that truly matters, or am I just living comfortably within my own small sphere? The feelings were less about malice toward Ben, and more about a profound internal questioning of his own inherent value. The established antidotes, however, were not to be discarded. They simply required a more nuanced application. 1. Acknowledging the disguise. Alex first had to strip away the veneer of Roy. Quote 53. He admitted to himself, without judgment, that the feeling was indeed envy. It wasn't pure inspiration, it was a desire for Ben's recognition and perceived moral authority, not just a pure desire to emulate his actions for their own sake. This honest self-assessment was crucial. 2. Redefining quote 54 and quote 55. He consciously challenged the notion that impact must be grand, public, or globally scaled to be meaningful. He reflected on his own contributions, the mentorship he provided to junior colleagues, the consistent support and love he offered his family, the small acts of kindness he performed in his community, his commitment to ethical practices in his daily work. He realized that true impact often resides in the quiet, consistent and unseen acts of integrity and care that ripple outwards, creating a stronger fabric of community and connection. His definition of key, quote 56, expanded to encompass the intrinsic value of his daily life, rather than being confined to externally validated heroic deeds. 3. Cultivating empathetic joy, mudita, with greater depth. This time, the practice of mudita required a deeper dive. It wasn't just congratulating Ben, it was genuinely connecting with the positive outcome of Ben's work. Alex allowed himself to feel joy for the communities Ben was serving, for the tangible good being done in the world, regardless of who was doing it. He shifted his focus from Ben is doing this and I am not to good is being done in the world, and that is a positive thing. This required a conscious detachment of the doer from the deed in his emotional response, allowing the positive energy of Ben's actions to uplift him rather than diminish him. Reaffirming intrinsic motivation and self-authorship, Alex returned to the bedrock of his own values. Why did he choose his profession? Why did he prioritize his family? He reminded himself that his life choices were rooted in his own authentic desires and principles, not in a reaction to others' paths. He reaffirmed his commitment to living a life of integrity, kindness, and purpose, as he defined it, not as dictated by societal expectations or the dazzling achievements of others. His purpose was not less valid because it was less publicized. Transforming envious energy into constructive action. Instead of allowing the feeling of inadequacy to paralyze him, Alex consciously channeled that energy. He looked for opportunities within his own sphere of influence to make a difference. He volunteered for a local literacy program, dedicating a few hours a week to reading with children. He initiated a conversation with his colleagues about a more sustainable recycling program at their office. These actions were not performed for external validation or to catch up with Ben. They were genuine expressions of his own desire to contribute, catalyzed by the initial pang of envy, but now driven by an internal compass. The encounter with Ben served as a powerful reminder that envy, in its most subtle forms, is a constant companion on the human journey. It is not a demon to be exorcised once and for all, but rather a persistent shadow that, when acknowledged and understood, can serve as an invaluable mirror. It reflects not what we lack, but what we deeply value, what we aspire to, and where our sense of self-worth might still be vulnerable to external comparison. For Alex, the experience solidified the understanding that true liberation from envy is not the eradication of the emotion itself, but the mastery of one's response to it. It is the continuous process of vigilant self-discovery, of transforming envy's corrosive energy into a catalyst for deeper self-understanding, authentic living, and a more profound engagement with one's own chosen path. The secret sickness of the soul becomes, in this ongoing practice, less a sickness and more a sophisticated guide, pointing towards unexplored aspects of one's values and purpose, inviting a continuous refinement of one's inner landscape. The peace Alex sought was not an absence of challenge, but the unwavering capacity to meet each challenge with wisdom, compassion, and an ever-deepening commitment to his authentic self. The journey he knew would never truly end, but the view from the path now walked with greater awareness was undeniably clearer, richer, and profoundly more meaningful. The journey toward liberation from envy is rarely a linear ascent. More often, it resembles a winding path through a landscape of shifting dunes, where familiar landmarks disappear and new mirages emerge. We have witnessed Alex's diligent efforts, his moments of profound insight and hard-won peace. He has confronted the overt manifestations of professional, familial, and even existential envy, learning to redirect its corrosive energy into self-awareness and constructive action. Yet, the secret sickness of the soul possesses an uncanny adaptability, a chameleon-like ability to blend into new psychological landscapes, often presenting itself in guises so subtle they can be mistaken for mere introspection or a healthy desire for self-improvement. Have you ever felt a deep, unsettling stir within, not born of another's material possessions or public accolades, but from a whisper that perhaps your own life, your fundamental choices, lack a certain je ne sais quoi, an elusive authenticity or unburdened freedom that seems to radiate from someone else? This is the terrain of self-envy, a particularly insidious strain that does not merely covet what another has, but what another is, or more precisely what they appear to be. It's a comparison not of achievements, but of perceived states of being, often leading to a profound questioning of one's own life narrative. Alex, for a time, had experienced a period of remarkable tranquility. The insights gained from confronting his envy of Mark's success, Sarah's promotion, Maya's academic brilliance, David's purposeful life, and Ben's humanitarian impact had coalesced into a robust internal framework. He felt grounded, secure in his redefined purpose, and genuinely content with the trajectory of his own unique path. He still encountered news of others' successes, of course, but the familiar cold knot in his stomach had largely dissolved, replaced by a quiet, often genuine sense of appreciation or even inspiration. He had cultivated his garden, and it bloomed with a quiet dignity. It was a chance encounter, a digital ghost from a past life flickering across his social media feed. Leo, a college acquaintance Alex hadn't thought about in years, popped up as a suggested connection. A quick scroll through Leo's profile revealed a life utterly divergent from Alex's own structured existence. Leo was a digital nomad, a freelance graphic designer who seemed to spend his days working from sun-drenched cafes in Lisbon, hiking through the Dolomites, or meditating on a beach in Thailand. His posts weren't boasts of material wealth, but vignettes of experiences, vibrant street art, breathtaking natural vistas, candid shots of shared meals with diverse friends from around the globe. There was an aura of effortless spontaneity, unburdened liberty, and an almost defiant joy that seemed to emanate from every pixel. As Alex scrolled, a familiar yet distinctly different sensation began to coalesce in his chest. It wasn't the sharp, acidic burn of wanting Mark's corner office or Ben's public acclaim. This was a softer, more pervasive ache, a subtle erosion of his hard-won contentment. It felt like a slow leak in the vessel of his self-acceptance. He looked around his comfortable living room at the familiar books on the shelf, the framed family photos, the very sofa where he often sat after a productive day at his stable, predictable job. Suddenly, his life, which had felt so rich and fulfilling just moments before, seemed static, constrained, perhaps even a little boring. This was the insidious whisper of self-envy, a highly sophisticated form of the secret sickness. It doesn't target external markers of success, but rather the internal landscape of perceived happiness, freedom, and authenticity. It's the envy of a life unlived, a path not taken, a version of oneself that feels perpetually out of reach. We often project onto others an idealized existence, stripping away their struggles and responsibilities, leaving only the glittering facade of their curated freedom. In Leo's case, Alex wasn't envying a promotion or a luxury car. He was envying a perceived state of being, a life seemingly unencumbered by the very responsibilities Alex had consciously chosen and cherished. A mortgage, a family, a career path that demanded stability over spontaneity. The narrator's voice, ever present, reminds us that this form of envy is particularly challenging because it often masquerades as a legitimate desire for personal growth or self-actualization. Quote, 65. One might ask. Quote, 66. Indeed, it is. But the crucial distinction lies in the source of that aspiration. Is it an inner calling born of genuine introspection and alignment with one's deepest values, or is it a reactive yearning triggered by the external glow of another's perceived perfection? When the latter is true, the desire is tainted by envy, leading not to genuine growth, but to a restless dissatisfaction with one's own perfectly valid choices. Alex found himself caught in this very trap. He had worked diligently to define his own purpose, to imbue his existing life with intention. Yet, seeing Leo's seemingly boundless freedom stirred a deep-seated insecurity. Had he made the right choices? Was his stability merely a cage? Was his chosen path, with its predictable rhythms and tangible responsibilities, truly authentic, or just the comfortable default? The questions gnawed at him, undermining the very foundations of his contentment. He felt a profound sense of FOMO, fear of missing out not on specific events but on an entire mode of existence. The danger here, as the psychological literature on social comparison extensively details, is the comparison of one's complex, multifaceted and fully known reality with another's carefully curated highlight reel. Alex knew his own anxieties, his moments of doubt, his everyday stresses. He did not know Leo's. He saw only the sun-drenched cafes and the mountain vistas, not the potential loneliness of constant movement, the financial precarity of freelancing, the effort required to maintain relationships across continents, or the quiet struggles that inevitably accompany any human life. He compared his entire story, with all its messy chapters, to Leo's glossy, edited trailer. The Quote 67 had found a new entry point, bypassing the usual defences Alex had built. This wasn't about competitive acquisition. It was about competitive self-identity. It suggested that Alex's carefully constructed sense of self, his very being, was somehow inferior or less desirable. It was a subtle poison, silently consumed, eroding his self-worth from within. But Alex, through his past trials, had cultivated a crucial muscle: mindful observation. He recognized the familiar discomfort, even in its new guise. He didn't immediately succumb to the urge to overhaul his life or to wallow in self-pity. He paused. He took a deep breath. What exactly am I envying? He asked himself, a question that had become a mantra in his journey. It wasn't the specific locations or even the freelance work. It was the feeling. Leo seemed to exude, unburdened, spontaneous, utterly true to himself. It was the perceived freedom. This deconstruction was vital. Alex began to peel back the layers of his envy. Was he genuinely longing for a nomadic life? Or was he longing for a sense of freedom and authenticity that he believed was lacking in his own? He thought about the responsibilities he carried, his family, his career, his community, and recognized that these were not burdens, but chosen commitments that brought him immense joy and meaning. His definition of freedom, he realized, was not the absence of ties, but the choice of which ties to embrace, and the ability to find joy and intention within those bonds. He consciously brought gratitude back into focus. He looked at his son's drawing on the fridge, felt the warmth of his wife's hand in his, recalled a challenging project at work that he had successfully navigated, bringing tangible value to his team. These were his anchors, his sources of deep, abiding contentment. They were not less authentic than Leo's adventures. They were simply different, expressions of a life well lived. Then came the actionable insight, the transformation of envious energy into constructive self-reflection. Instead of wishing for Leo's life, Alex asked. Quote 69. This wasn't about imitation, but inspiration. Perhaps it meant planning a spontaneous weekend trip with his family, rediscovering a long-neglected hobby, or simply dedicating an hour each day to creative exploration, unburdened by external expectations. It meant finding the Lisbon cafe within his own routine, the Dolomite hike in his local park, the beach meditation in his quiet moments of mindfulness. The journey against envy is indeed one of persistent vigilance. It is not a battle won once and for all, but an ongoing commitment to understanding the self, to questioning the narratives we consume, and to continually re-evaluating our own values. The unresolved mystery is not a flaw in our progress, but an inherent aspect of the human condition, a testament to the ever-present challenge of cultivating one's own unique garden. True liberation, Alex was learning, was not the eradication of every envious thought, but the unwavering mastery of one's response, the conscious choice to tend to one's own soul, and to find profound, authentic joy in the life one has chosen to build. The journey is the liberation, a continuous unfolding of self-awareness and unwavering commitment to one's unique path. The journey into the psychology of envy is not a quest for eradication, but for transformation. It is not about silencing the whisper of comparison entirely, but about learning to distinguish its voice from the deeper resonance of one's own authentic self. The unresolved mystery Alex had come to understand was not a puzzle to be solved once and for all, but a constant state of vigilance, a continuous refinement of internal radar. Envy, in its protean nature, rarely announces its arrival with the same fanfare. It adapts, it shifts, it finds new crevices in the soul, new landscapes of comparison to exploit. Have you ever felt the quiet satisfaction of your own path, only to have it subtly undermined by the amplified voice of another? This is the insidious nature of what we might call envy of amplified voice, or envy of influence, a variant that gnaws not at material possessions or professional titles, but at the perceived reach and impact of one's ideas, passions, or contributions. It is the silent question. Does my voice matter if it is not heard as loudly as theirs? Alex had settled into a comfortable rhythm, a hard-won peace built upon the foundations of self-compassion, gratitude, and a redefined sense of purpose. He found profound joy in his daily work, in his family, in the small, consistent acts of kindness and contribution he wove into the fabric of his life. He genuinely felt aligned, no longer haunted by Mark's promotions or Leo's digital wanderlust. He had made his peace with his own choices, finding freedom within his commitments. Then came the email. An old university friend, Clara, had just released her debut book. Quote 75. The email was from the University Alumni Association, celebrating her achievement, detailing her upcoming book tour, podcast appearances, and interviews with major media outlets. Alex remembered Clara as a thoughtful, articulate person, passionate about local community building and the erosion of genuine human connection in the digital age. He shared many of her concerns, often discussing them with his wife, even volunteering for a local neighbourhood revitalisation project, quietly contributing to the very themes Clara was now championing on a national stage. As he read, the familiar, unwelcome sensation began to stir. It wasn't the sharp, acidic burn of professional rivalry, nor the dull ache of moral inadequacy. This was different. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor, a faint dissonance in the harmony he had cultivated. It felt like a quiet erasure. I care about this too, he thought. I work on this too, but no one knows my name. No one is amplifying my voice. The knot, though lighter than before, began to form, a familiar tightening in his chest. It was the envy of recognition, of impact, of having one's deeply held beliefs validated and broadcast to a wider world. This form of envy is particularly insidious because it often targets areas where one has already invested significant emotional and intellectual capital. It preys on our innate human desire to be seen, to be heard, to make a difference that extends beyond our immediate sphere. When someone else articulates our unspoken thoughts, champions our quiet causes, or receives accolades for insights we ourselves hold dear, it can trigger a profound sense of being overlooked, of our own efforts being rendered invisible. It is a challenge to our sense of significance, a quiet questioning of our own unique contribution. Alex felt a strange mix of genuine admiration for Clara's accomplishment and a burgeoning resentment that pricked at the edges of his hard-won serenity. He found himself scrolling through the articles, reading the glowing reviews, a part of him genuinely happy for her, another part quietly dissecting her success. She got the agent, she got the publisher, she got the platform. He thought of the countless conversations he'd had, the hours he'd spent volunteering, the small consistent acts he'd undertaken, all in service of the same ideals. Yet his impact remained local, uncelebrated, unamplified. His mind, ever adept at comparison, began to construct a narrative of the one who made it big versus the one who remained small. The danger here, as Alex knew from experience, was not in the initial feeling, but in allowing it to fester, to morph into a corrosive self-pity or a cynical dismissal of Clara's genuine achievement. This was the moment of choice, the point where the well-worn path of envy could once again pull him into its shadow. But Alex was no longer a novice in this internal landscape. He had mapped its contours, understood its treacherous turns. His first immediate response was a conscious breath, a slowing down of the internal narrative. He recognized the sensation, the familiar physiological response. "Ah, old friend," he thought, a wry smile touching his lips. "You again." This was mindful observation, the critical first step. He didn't judge the feeling, didn't chastise himself for its return. Instead, he simply acknowledged its presence. "This is envy of amplified voice," he articulated internally. "It's triggered by Clara's public recognition for something I also deeply care about and contribute to." Next came self-compassion. "It's okay to feel this," he whispered to himself. "It's a very human response to seeing someone else's widely recognized success, especially when it aligns with your own passions. It doesn't diminish your own efforts or your own worth." This wasn't an excuse to wallow, but an act of kindness, a gentle acceptance that disarmed the internal critic and prevented the feeling from spiraling into self-recrimination. He allowed himself to feel the slight sting, but consciously unhooked it from any judgment about his character. Then he moved to gratitude. He closed his eyes and began to list, silently, the things he was grateful for in his own life, specifically related to his passion for community. He was grateful for the opportunity to volunteer, for the tangible difference he saw in his local park, for the meaningful conversations he had with his neighbors, for the sense of belonging he felt within his own community, however small. He was grateful for the freedom to pursue his passions in his own way, without the pressures of public scrutiny or constant media demands. This wasn't about denying Clara's success, but about reaffirming the richness and validity of his own chosen path. The next step, always a powerful antidote, was empathetic joy. He forced himself to genuinely consider Clara's journey. He imagined the years of dedicated work, the countless hours of writing, the rejections, the triumphs, the sheer courage it took to put her ideas out into the world. He thought of the positive impact her book would have, reaching people he could never hope to reach, sparking conversations and actions on a much larger scale. "Good for her," he said aloud, letting the words resonate with genuine warmth. "What an amazing achievement! Her success truly benefits the cause we both care about." This act of extending genuine goodwill began to dissolve the last vestiges of resentment, transforming it into a shared sense of purpose. Finally, Alex engaged in self-authorship and reframing. He recognized that his desire wasn't necessarily to be Clara, with her book tours and media appearances. His desire was for his voice to matter, for his contributions to be meaningful. He reframed Clara's success not as a competition, but as a validation of the importance of their shared passion. Her amplified voice didn't diminish his, it underscored the universal relevance of their work. He realized that impact doesn't always equate to amplification. A quiet ripple can be just as potent as a crashing wave, often more sustainable, more deeply integrated into the fabric of daily life. He considered what his own amplified voice might look like, not as a mimicry of Clara's, but as an authentic expression of his unique contribution. Perhaps it wasn't a book, or a podcast, or a national tour. Perhaps it was mentoring a younger colleague, or initiating a new local project, or simply continuing to be a consistent positive force within his immediate community. He decided to write a sincere congratulatory email to Clara, not simply as a formality, but as an act of genuine recognition and shared passion. He even offered to help promote her book within his local networks, finding a way to connect his quiet efforts with her amplified message. This was the ongoing work, the continuous refinement of the soul's compass. Alex understood now that envy was not a demon to be exorcised, but a persistent shadow that followed the light of human aspiration. It would reappear in new guises whenever he encountered a perceived disparity in achievement, recognition, or perceived freedom. But each recurrence was no longer a descent into despair. It was an invitation to practice, an opportunity to wield the tools he had so diligently acquired. The liberation he sought was not the absence of envy, but the freedom from its control. It was the ability to feel its familiar stirrings and, instead of succumbing to its corrosive grip, to consciously choose a different path, a path of self-awareness, self-compassion, gratitude, empathetic joy, and authentic self-authorship. This persistent vigilance was not a burden, but a practice of profound self-love and a commitment to living a life truly resonant with his own values, regardless of the amplified voices around him. The echo of others would always be there, but now Alex knew how to listen for the stronger, truer resonance of his own unique self. The journey toward self-authorship, toward a liberation from the insidious grip of envy, is rarely a straight path. Alex had, by all measures, achieved remarkable progress. The cold, hard knot in his stomach, once a frequent companion, had loosened considerably, often replaced by a quiet hum of contentment. He had learned to embrace gratitude, practice radical self-compassion, redefine success on his own terms, and cultivate empathetic joy. He had navigated the treacherous waters of professional rivalry, parental anxiety, existential angst, moral comparison, the allure of unburdened freedom, and the envy of amplified voice. Each challenge had been a crucible, forging a stronger, more resilient self. He found himself, weeks after Clara's book launch, in a state of sustained calm, a feeling he hadn't thought possible. He still engaged with social media, but the reflexive comparisons had largely ceased. He could appreciate others' successes, Mark's latest venture, Sarah's continued ascent, Ben's humanitarian strides, Leo's travel photos, Clara's growing influence, without feeling diminished. He had truly begun to inhabit the truth that another's light does not dim his own. Yet, the human psyche is an intricate landscape, with hidden valleys and peaks that reveal themselves only when one has ascended to a certain height. One blustery autumn afternoon, Alex found himself at a local coffee shop, a place he often frequented for a quiet hour of reading. Across the room, nestled in a worn armchair, sat Ilara, a woman he knew vaguely from community events. Ilara was not celebrated for grand achievements, nor did she possess any overt markers of status that might typically trigger Alex's former patterns of envy. She simply was. She sat sipping her tea, a faint smile playing on her lips as she gazed out the window, seemingly utterly at peace. Her presence radiated a profound serenity, a quietude that seemed to absorb the ambient chatter and clatter without disturbance. And in that moment, a flicker, subtle and almost imperceptible, stirred within Alex. It wasn't the familiar sharp pang of inadequacy, nor the bitter taste of resentment. It was something far more nuanced, a wistful yearning, a quiet question. Why can't I possess that unshakable calm? Have I truly found liberation if such deep, effortless peace still feels just beyond my grasp? This was the envy of an inner state, a yearning for a perceived spiritual or emotional superiority. It highlighted a profound truth about the nature of this secret sickness of the soul. Envy, in its most refined form, can transcend the material and the external, burrowing into the very fabric of one's being, targeting not what others have, but what they are. Have you ever found yourself observing someone who seems perpetually unruffled, effortlessly content, immune to the daily anxieties that plague you? That elusive quality, that inner stillness, can become a new frontier for comparison, a new benchmark against which we measure our own journey toward well-being. This form of envy is particularly insidious because it preys on our deepest desires for inner harmony and freedom from suffering. We might rationalize it as admiration or a healthy aspiration, but beneath the surface, the familiar undercurrent of quote 81 can still churn. It speaks to the ongoing, iterative nature of self-discovery, reminding us that liberation is not a fixed destination but a continuous process of becoming. The ego, ever vigilant, can find new territories to stake its claims of lack, even in the most spiritualized landscapes. Alex recognized the sensation, albeit in a new guise. It was softer, less aggressive than the envy he had once known, but it was there, a gentle tug of insufficiency, a quiet whisper that his own hard-won peace was somehow incomplete compared to Ilara's apparent profundity. He didn't immediately shame himself for the feeling. That was a crucial step he had mastered, the recognition without judgment. Instead, he leaned into it, observing it with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a new specimen. What is this feeling truly about? He mused, sipping his own lukewarm coffee. It wasn't about Ilara herself. He didn't wish her peace away. It was about a perceived deficit within himself, a lingering belief that he hadn't yet. Quote 82, at the ultimate state of equanimity. He saw Ilara's serenity as a finished product, a perfected state, while his own journey felt perpetually in motion, characterized by effort and conscious practice. This moment called for a deeper application of his established tools, refined through months of diligent self-work. First, self-compassion was paramount. He acknowledged the feeling without condemnation. It's okay to feel this, he told himself. It's a desire for deeper peace, and that's a natural human yearning. It doesn't negate the progress I've made. This acceptance disarmed the feeling of its power to shame him. Next, mindfulness allowed him to dissect the experience. He noticed the subtle tension in his jaw, the slight constriction in his chest. He observed the thoughts. She seems so effortlessly calm. Why do I still have to work so hard at it? Will I ever get there? By observing these thoughts as mere mental events, rather than absolute truths, he created a space between himself and the envy. He realized that Ilara's inner state was not a possession he lacked, but a deeply personal, internal process that had culminated in a visible serenity. And his own process was just that, his own. Then came redefining success. His previous definitions of success had been external, career, possessions, or action-oriented, impact, freedom. Now he had to redefine inner peace. It wasn't about achieving a static, impenetrable state, but about the skill in navigating the inevitable fluctuations of life with grace. It was about the agility of his mind, the speed of his recovery from disturbance, the depth of his self-awareness. Ilara's peace, he realized, was not a destination he could simply arrive at. It was a continuous cultivation, perhaps one born of different life experiences and practices than his own. His success lay not in mirroring her, but in deepening his own authentic journey. Crucially, gratitude re-entered the picture. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the gentle hum of the coffee shop fade. He brought to mind the quiet contentment he did feel, the moments of joy with his family, the satisfaction of his work, the deep connection he felt with his community. He remembered the cold knot, the relentless comparisons, the gnawing sense of inadequacy that had once defined his days. He was not that man anymore. He had cultivated a rich inner landscape full of tools and insights. His peace might not be Ilara's, but it was his, hard-won and deeply cherished. He was grateful for the journey, for the lessons, for the very capacity to recognize and work with this subtle envy. Finally, he revisited the empathetic joy. He opened his eyes and looked at Ilara again. This time there was no longing, no sense of lack. There was only a quiet appreciation for her presence, a silent acknowledgement of the beauty of a human being in harmony with herself. Her peace, he understood, was a gift to the world, a ripple of calm in a chaotic environment. It diminished him not one iota. In fact, it offered a gentle inspiration, not to be her, but to continue his own path with renewed dedication. This encounter served as a profound reminder. The liberation from envy is not the eradication of the emotion itself, but the mastery of one's response to it. It is a continuous process of vigilant self-discovery, a perpetual refinement of the internal compass. Envy, in its lingering whispers, can transform from a corrosive poison into a sensitive barometer, indicating areas within the self that still crave attention, understanding, or integration. It becomes a catalyst for deeper self-understanding, a call to cultivate even greater authenticity and joy. Alex understood now that the journey was unending, but the nature of the journey had fundamentally changed. He was no longer a passive recipient of envy's sting, but an active participant in its transformation. He was not seeking a static state of being cured, but embracing a dynamic process of becoming. Each subtle stir, each new flicker of comparison was an invitation to practice, to deepen his wisdom, to further integrate the lessons learned. The secret sickness of the soul, once a debilitating affliction, had become, in his hands, a powerful instrument for profound self-authorship and the cultivation of an authentic, joyful life, lived fully and consciously, one present moment at a time.